Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Futurum Tech Webcast. I'm your host, Shelly Kramer, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Ron Westfall, and we are going to talk today about the digital divide and where the telco industry is in its journey to the cloud. Before we get started on that conversation, however, I want to take a minute and remind you that this show is intended for informational purposes and educational purposes only. We bring our opinions, and we've got lots of them, to the conversation. Anything we say should not be construed as investment advice or anything else. So with that out of the way, we're going to dive into our show. So what is the digital divide and why is it so important to solve? I'll admit that I was driving my 14-year-old high school freshman to school this morning, and we were talking about the digital divide, and I was giving her some examples about how I had been listening to a show on NPR, and I was giving her some examples about the differences that exist between people who live in cities. You know, we live in a moderately sized city of 1.6 million, Kansas City, Missouri. But I was explaining that even in our own community, we have a digital divide between people who have good internet access, who can afford internet access. I was sharing with her how expensive that is for our family. And I was also sharing with her the fact that some families don't have computers and they have to do their schoolwork on devices, or they're in a situation where they have a family who shares a body of compute, a family shares one laptop. Another example that I was giving her is that, and this was kind of what prompted my conversation with her this morning, the show on NPR was talking about the fact that the workplace has shifted such that, Ron, when you had an opportunity that might be in Denver, Colorado to work for a company, it used to be that you had to pick up your family and move to Denver, Colorado to do that job. What a global pandemic is showing us and showing, employers is that, you can live in a suburb of Houston, Texas, and do that job for that company just as well without living in that community. So part of the conversation on NPR was around how the onus is on cities across the United States to make sure that they are doing what they can to breach this digital divide and to make it possible for people to work from anywhere, to do business from anywhere, to learn from anywhere. And I think that's really the crux of our conversation today. And again, my timing was just perfect with my 14-year-old, because I happened to be listening to this topic without even, we had planned to have this conversation, you and I, Ron. But it was kind of perfect timing for that. So, talk with us a little bit. You are immersed in all things related to the telecom industry and, and 5G and connectivity and everything else. So I'm really interested to hear some of your thoughts on, the importance of the telecom industry being able to shift and being able to develop the right kind of infrastructure and that sort of thing to be able to meet this demand. So talk with us a little bit, Ron, about what you're seeing in the market.
Well, great question, Shelly. And this is just a great way to kick it off, because you're right. The digital divide is a hot topic, and it's only going to get hotter because, as you pointed out, the global COVID-19 pandemic has really put broadband access at the forefront because it's become essential to our daily lives, especially in areas like work from home, workforces, distance learning, public safety, and likewise public health. And as a result, we're seeing more resources being allocated to address this vital issue. In the U.S. alone, the federal government has allocated $37 billion over the next 10 years just to see how we can close the digital divide. For example, the 2019 Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, or RDOF, has $20.4 billion set aside for the next 10 years. In addition, there's the 2020 5G Fund for Rural America that has $9 billion for the next 10 years. So the funds are boosting the economic feasibility, pushing rural broadband and other hard to reach places. And it's just a great time for service providers to take advantage of these funding opportunities here in the US. And if you look across the globe, it's really the same impetus, the same prioritization. So, for example, if you look at internet.org, which is the brainchild of Facebook, to provide solutions in order to access materials from the internet. And through this app, people can access web pages on health, local information on job opportunities. And thankfully, this initiative is having an impact in places like Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And in addition, you look at another initiative such as Linux for Africa, which is working to specifically bridge the digital divide between developed nations and developing nations. And naturally, the focus here is on Africa. And they're doing this by ensuring access to information technology. They're taking, for example, used and discarded computers from places like Germany and using open source software and programs such as the Terminal Server Project. And this is quite simply allowing institutions like schools and hospitals to have this vital access. And I think another great example is the Satellite and Advanced Multimedia Education Project, or SAME. And here, this is a satellite-based approach to extend quality education, focusing on schools to be able to access high quality educators in rural as well as urban areas throughout India. And so what we're seeing, our schools are using SAME as a means to bring the educational expertise in the form of expert teachers, as well as content developers through the Indian Institute of Management. And so this is really compelling. This is demonstrating like this is something that decision makers in government and societies are really committed to solving. And so this is pointing to that we can finally really make serious progress in this area. And I believe there are compelling reasons in terms of the technology side of this.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm constantly going back to my conversation with my teenager. One of the things that I told her was that, this pandemic that we're living through, which, gosh, wouldn't it be great if this is a once in a lifetime thing? But I told her, I said that this pandemic that we're living through together across the world is forcing us to pivot and to do things more rapidly and to do things that, that we're kind of on our, wouldn't it be nice if there was equity as it related to, internet access and computers and things like that. And, we certainly haven't solved that problem in its entirety, but the reality of it isn't, as you've mentioned with some of these programs, we're certainly being forced in a way to adopt these things in a much more rapid fashion. I think that's good for everybody. Speaking of satellite, I know that we've written about this before. I know our colleague Sarah Wallace has written about satellites and low Earth satellites and that sort of thing. I was watching a show the other day with one of my kids, and it was a kind of a throwback to the 80s. And, I was hearing the familiar dial-up sounds, when we used to access the internet by way of AOL or some other dial-up that was crazy slow. And, satellite internet is it's really cool. Right now, it already outperforms dial-up, which that is a pretty low bar, right? But the thinking is that these emerging technologies could bring satellite internet up to par with cable or fiber net internet capabilities. And I think that's pretty cool. You want to talk a little bit about satellite prospects and what you see moving forward?
Naturally. And yes, satellite internet is a key piece of this. Already, we've seen the example in India. And you hit the nail on the head in the fact that we now have new satellite technologies, particularly in the form of more advanced low Earth orbit satellites, or LEO satellites. And they are really designed to overcome the shortcomings of previous generation satellite internet technology, which was plagued by slow speeds, high latency, high pricing. And thankfully, these are going to become annoyances of the past. I at least certainly believe that. And to your point, satellite internet technology is already better than legacy dial-up and DSL in most places, and is in fact now going to become on par with cable and high-speed fiber access in many areas. And so, for example, here in the US, cable internet covers about 89% of the population, while fiber is available to only about 41% of the population. So this is according to the FCC. So this is pretty good data. And so this is automatically indicating that millions of Americans are underserved,
Right.
quite simply, when it comes to broadband. And so instead of satellite being a last resort technology for internet connections, it now can become a viable option that's on par with cable or fiber, let alone DSL. And so, yeah, for example, as we've written, Starlink is a high-profile company that's a name of the satellite network that SpaceX is developing to provide low-cost internet to remote locations, as well as more densely populated areas that could use more internet competition. And what SpaceX is eventually hoping to do is have as many as 12,000 satellites in its proposed mega constellation. So it's like paralleling, the same principle with 5G. The more cell sites you have, the more density you have, quite simply, the better coverage you have. And the technology is better in terms of being able to transport all of those additional sites to enable high quality internet access. And so with that, the performance now surpasses that of the older satellite internet technology we touched on. But it's also what I was pointing to, that the global network is unbounded by ground infrastructure limitations as well. And this is where we're seeing breakthrough in the transport side of things, being able to backhaul all of these connections in a far more efficient, high quality way.
Right.
And as a result, I'm anticipating that Starlink will have an impact as early as the end of this year. They're looking to target service in the northern part of the US and Canada, and looking to expand to a global basis during 2021, particularly as many of the restrictions related to the global pandemic start lifting. So these are all very encouraging signs, and satellite is one key piece. There are other key pieces that I think are important, and but already satellite is queued up to make a difference.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Although I do think a little bit about the clutter in the skies and that how that will become a problem that we'll have to address as well. So,
Exactly.
so let's talk a little bit. You hit on underserved households, underserved areas, and they are. I mean, we talk a little bit about that in the United States, and rural areas are definitely underserved, but there are also massively underserved areas across the globe, and I think to me, that's where 5G technologies become really interesting, and things like fixed wireless access become a factor. Talk with us a little bit about what the growth in FWA connections is predicted to be and why that's relevant.
Exactly. And so here is another breakthrough area. In fact, we know 5G is already delivering higher bandwidth, lower latencies just for mobile connections on mobile devices, such as smartphones, and likewise any other device that has mobility. And as a result, it's also enabling fixed wireless access capabilities. And what is different now is that we have tried to use what were called local loop alternatives using wireless technology in the past. However, that really hit a brick wall because there were severely limiting considerations. For example, with the WiMAX deployments of the past, the technology had some intriguing possibilities, but it was first of all plagued by the fact that it was a proprietary approach. And so what 5G is different about is that it is a standardized approach that has the imprimatur of the 3GPP backing. And so this automatically allows for more assurances in terms of having interoperability out of the box, assuring that multi-vendor implementations aren't going to be a stumbling block in terms of simply getting a access technology out there. Not to mention, there were other limiting factors in terms of using something like WiMAX, and that's even though there was the ability to avoid fiber trenching, it simply wasn't performing as effectively as advertised. And so we've already seen FWA make a significant progress. And in fact, what we're seeing is the fact that FWA connections are actually expected to become up to 160 million by the end of 2025. And that would account for 25% of all mobile network data traffic globally. And so this is indicating that what we're seeing already is the fact that FWA is reaching, for example, business parks that are cut off by bodies of water, rural areas, and so forth. And this has become an actual viable alternative to fiber connections and to DSL connections, is that we can anticipate they'll have even broader impact, not just in developing regions, but even in some other places that we wouldn't expect from before. And that includes urban areas and so forth. And so this information, I think, is valid. And I think it is another key piece of the puzzle as to how we're going to get internet access quite simply to a universal basis, and using satellite, FWA, as well as simply more fiber builds as the regulatory bodies enable more of this capability. This is all pointing to, quite simply, making dramatic progress in terms of closing the digital divide.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this is a nice sort of lead in to service providers and where they are in terms of, what the technical considerations and the business considerations that exist for being able to play a role here. And they do play, telcos play, and internet service providers play a key role here, in things like, automation of the network operations, and security, of course, is a fundamental piece, and things like network service orchestration and analytics and network controllers, like all of those things play a role. But what do you see on the landscape in terms of service providers and where they are in terms of being able to take on the task and the responsibility of, these new capabilities? Where are they on that spectrum of being ready and knowledgeable enough and innovative enough to be able to take that on? What do you see there?
Exactly. I think going back to the example of the U.S. funding, the $37 billion that's been allocated, we've already seen some local rural operators not only be able to take advantage of the progress in the access technologies, but really looking at this from a strategic and fundamental level, i.e., it's one thing to have improved FWA connections to reach a broader area of coverage. But it also has to be synced up with network intelligence. As you pointed out, it's also about ensuring from the launch of these new services to have automated lifecycle orchestration to enable that when you have something like an upgrade that's required, or to assure efficiency in all parts of the network, it's already built in. You just can't glue this on after the fact. Otherwise, you're just going to have unhappy customers and, quite simply, very limited progress in closing the digital divide. And I think, yes, security is definitely vital. I think we've seen from our own research that when it comes to 5G deployments, it consistently ranked as the #1 concern, at least certainly when it came to operators targeting the business side of coverage. And so what we can anticipate is that along with these built-in capabilities with automation, as well as SDN transport capabilities that are far more efficient than legacy transport capabilities, and also the fact that this will link into end-to-end security assurances. So we're not having to troubleshoot security as these new services are deployed. It already is factored in, and it will be a lot easier to solve the security challenges that are already out there. I mean, this is not going to change because we're getting more broadband access out there to hard to reach areas, but that includes malware protection. It includes application-specific security. It includes protection against distributed denial of service attacks, which I think everybody has had to bear the brunt of in some form recently. Like if you go to your favorite web service site and suddenly you can't reach it, that was probably because of that. And so what this is all pointing to is that the operators are really become smarter about this, and they're tapping into these funding resources to really finance that part. They have familiarity with access technologies, but it really is taking this holistic end-to-end approach that's really going to be the kicker. That's going to be this fundamental difference maker in getting this access really to a broad universal basis to everybody.
Right. And a topic that Sarah and I tackled in our most recent Futurum Tech Webcast was the topic of partnerships and how in today's business world, and I really think that it doesn't matter what you do, what sector you serve, smart partnerships, I think, are really the path forward. And I think that, what we're seeing when it comes to these rural service providers is that, yes, there's some great government funding that you need to take advantage of. But I think that realizing that there are partners out there, partners like Cisco, Adtran, Nokia, and Ericsson, who know this stuff, who have the resources to step in and provide a significant assist and to speed up the process for a lot of these rural partners. I think that's really important for them to understand and know that that's an option for them, and I see, I think you covered this recently, some news that Cisco is really committed to closing the digital divide, and they're engaged in a robust rural broadband push. And they also have a new report out. It's the Cisco's 2020 Inclusive Future Report that, if you're interested in this topic, I'll link it in the show notes, but it estimates that providing internet access to unconnected parts of the planet has the potential to lift 500 million people out of poverty. And the report also indicates that internet usage and lower levels of inequality often have a close correlation, making digital communications infrastructure essential to attain equality. So, so Cisco's really tried to prioritize, enabling an inclusive future, making broadband infrastructure available to everyone, especially rural communities. So I think that, I think we're seeing Cisco's not the only service provider, not the only big tech company doing this. I think we're seeing more and more of this. But again, I think it goes back to really smart partnerships with some of the established vendors in this place are going to play a big role in the success of rural communities throughout, in the United States and the world over. And I think that I'm sure that you agree with me on that one.
Exactly. And I couldn't come up with better examples. And you're fundamentally right. It is an ecosystem play. Yeah. And it is important for the service providers to have strategic partners. This Cisco initiative is aligning with their Internet for the Future initiative. And this is fundamentally emphasizing the fact that it has to be ecosystem play. It has to be thought out all the way from the semiconductor chipset level all the way to the most advanced software implementations. And it includes making sure that all the pieces are synced up and working together in an automated, real-time fashion. So this is really raising the level of the game. And it really is correlating to the reality out there that in order for this to work, these services, these connections have to have those built-in capabilities. Mm-hmm. And, we're seeing, for example, when it comes to what can be characterized as 5G greenfield builds, such as Rakuten, based in Japan, as well as Dish here in the US, they're not coming out and saying, oh, here is the one supplier that we want to make this work end to end. They're announcing multiple suppliers. So it's not just, for example, about the transport aspects and the routing aspects, which Cisco is capable of supplying, but it's also about the radio access network. So we're seeing relatively new players like Mavenir and Altiostar being enlisted to enable these capabilities. And we're certainly seeing companies such as Nokia and Ericsson paying special attention to digital divide initiatives. And so So, for example, you have the Ericsson Mobility Report, which is really, I believe, validating the business case for fixed wireless access, for example. And also, we're quite simply seeing that it's also about the software components. So we're seeing companies such as Netcracker and Amdocs and Matrix Software. Really the telco software specialists playing a vital cog in all of this. Right. So it is not just about partners; it is about an ecosystem play. And so the ones that you're engaged with directly, i.e. the operators, they have to make sure that the suppliers that they select can assure interoperability with the hot new application out there. It could be an Internet of Things capability. It can be the gaming application. Obviously, none of these companies are directly supplying a gaming application. It's going to rely on being able to interoperate with these capabilities and working with public cloud providers as needed and so forth. And so what this is all is totaling up to is the fact that it is something that is going to be powered by ecosystem prioritization, being enabled by government funding, but also quite simply the fact that the players out there are prioritizing their own resources to make this happen. Right. And we already know that there's built-in rewards. The more access that a country has, and we've seen this with mobile money applications, for example, it is a huge difference maker. And in these remote villages and developing regions, the mobile phone is the only means of communication, but it's also the only means of financing. For example, being able to use mobile money in order to conduct transactions in a secure, predictable way. Quite simply, there aren't ATMs and bank branches in many of these places. And so this is showing that this can really make a difference. It's already done so in many places. And now it's just really making sure that this happens on a truly universal basis. And I think we're very close to enabling that, at least for anybody who has a desire to have a secure internet connection, preferably with enhanced mobile broadband capabilities or flat out broadband capabilities.
Well, it is a game changer for sure. And as we know, this is, the time for this has come. So, whether we're here in the United States or anywhere else in the world, navigating, a work from home, a learn from home culture, and the shift that, that our workplace is undergoing right now and our education system is undergoing right now. And then you extrapolate that out into third world countries and the needs that they have. So the time is now. And there's really some exciting things happening. And I think that, it'll be interesting to watch the telco industry as it moves forward collectively on its journey to the cloud. And, we've already seen some great partnerships. I know we'll see some more interesting partnerships. And we've seen lots and lots of big brands, many of whom, we are lucky enough to work with, many of whom you mentioned today, who are making some significant inroads. So I think with that, I'm going to wrap up our show here. And I'm going to thank you, Ron, as always, for sharing your deep technical expertise on this topic. I know that it's a topic that, you're immersed in all day, every day. And it's always great to have these conversations with you. So thanks for hanging out today. And I look forward to continuing this conversation.
Thank you, Shelly. And yes, time has come today. And I think that's the right note to end our conversation today.
Well, all right, then. I'll see you on the flip side.